Chapter 31. Jack Strom never made it to his appointment with the gallows. He succumbed to a fever during the night. After briefly examining the body, Dr. Manning reported the obvious. The fever had resulted from his injury. Both sheriff and doctor agreed. Had he the will to live, he'd likely have survived. But supposedly, he'd figured there was no point in fighting for his life, just to hang the next day. Nonetheless, John Scythe felt the criminal had got off easy compared to what awaited him. He felt Strom should have had the courage to face what he had to face. There was more to it than just the hangman's noose, after all. But what did he expect from the likes of Jack Strom, a man who'd lived a lie for most of his life? The doctor, after listening to the sheriff's thoughts, handed the death certificate over.
"I understand how you're feeling, John, but at least we are secure in our knowledge that justice was done. There's no doubt of his guilt. He was caught, and he paid the ultimate price."
He closed his medical bag with a loud snap.
"I'll let the undertaker know about his passing. He has a box fitted and waiting."
John nodded petulantly.
"Mighty kind of you, Doc. Don't want 'em smelling up the place."
"Are you going to bury him in the town cemetery?"
"Yep."
"All right, then, Sheriff. You take care of yourself. No over-exertion, you hear?"
With a slight grin, the sheriff herded the doctor from the office, and then glanced at the body.
"Coward,"
he intoned, and spat on the floor. Wilhelmina's sister, Abigail Pitt, arrived in town a week after Jack Strom died. Abigail sought out the sheriff immediately, and introduced herself as Ms. Abigail Pitt. An extremely tall woman, she dwarfed the sheriff by more than 5 inches. Her silvery hair was tied loosely in a bun, and smile lines accented her firm, tiny mouth. She explained her parents were too frail for the long journey, and so entrusted her with discovering just what had happened to their daughter. The sheriff was instantly reminded of a favorite schoolmistress, and in a rare display of kindness patiently described exactly how things transpired, sparing no details. Abigail received the news stalwartly, and with a well-disguised tremor in her voice, made a valiant effort to thank the sheriff for being so straightforward with her. Elizabeth, upon hearing of Miss Pitt's arrival, promptly invited her to the ranch, consciously enabling Abigail to see where Wilhelmina had lived, and collect any of her remaining belongings. Fully knowledgeable of the Reigns and their involvement in the case, Abigail welcomed the opportunity to visit. The morning following the invitation, Abigail's carriage pulled up to the house, and after disembarking, she was given a full tour of the property that was formerly her sister's home. Once the tour was concluded, she sat, a little sadly, at the kitchen table with her courteous and sympathetic host and hostess. Abigail fell in love with Elizabeth's herbal tea, remarking that it prompted vague memories of her grandmother. Appreciating the nourishment, she sipped 2 cups, and helped herself to 2 more slices of Elizabeth's delicious pound cake. Feeling relaxed and comfortable, she smoothly lapsed into family reminiscences. She empathized with Paxton's umbrage at having trusted Jack for all those years, only to be entirely deceived by his character. Abigail explained how astounded, furious, and grief-stricken she was that Jack had murdered both her sister and Elizabeth's father so calculatedly and cold-bloodedly. It was far worse than her family had initially feared. Jack had given the Pitts the impression of being such a decent chap. Apparently, they, too, had been susceptible to his charm. But in one thing Abigail was determined she had not been deceived, and that was how much the man had loved her sister. "Wilhelmina was everything to Jack," she declared. "At least in the beginning she was." Abigail went on to clarify why they had never come in search of Wilhelmina. Jack had written to her family, and in his letter wove a plausible story, telling them that Wilhelmina and he had decided to move to Africa. He wished to further hone his skills, and believed Africa was the place to do it. He'd underlined how excited Wilhelmina was about the adventures they'd have roaming about on safaris and tours. He wrote that it might be difficult to send regular correspondence, so not to worry if they were seldom heard from. That was the last they heard from either Jack or Wilhelmina. The final few letters received from her sister mentioned Eustace quite often, and the family had begun to wonder if going to Africa was actually a means of saving the Strom marriage. After several years of hearing nothing, they started to fear the worst, but hadn't a clue where to begin searching. The sheriff's telegram was the first news they'd heard of Wilhelmina in many years. Abigail decided to stay longer than she'd originally planned, and found, as the Reigns did, that the visit turned out to be unexpectedly consoling. Despite not being able to see her sister's killer hang, or even to speak with him, she was pleased and comforted to recognize and collect a few of Wilhelmina's personal treasures, which Elizabeth relinquished without a moment's hesitation. Bidding farewell and expressing deep gratitude to the Reigns, Abigail reluctantly went back to town, facing the inevitable journey home to relate to her family the tragic news of her sister's demise. She located the sheriff in his office and extended her sincere appreciation for Wilhelmina's diary, which he'd given her, and finally knowing her sister's appalling and heart-wrenching fate. The sheriff nodded at her, gruffly uttered his condolences to her and her family one last time, and wished her a safe trip home.